Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here with a review of Honoré de Balzac's Letters of Two Brides. And let's just talk about how much I loved this novel, far more than anything else that I've read in this volume. And in fact, I think it's my second favorite Honoré de Balzac work that I've read. My most favorite at this point being Cousin Bet. But Letters of Two Brides is a novel about society, it's a novel about love, and most importantly, it's a novel about marriage and the difference between a marriage based on reason, on traditional societal French values, and a marriage based on passion, on love, on the idea of loving someone not for themselves, but loving them because they love you. And we have these two sort of polar opposite women in the novel by the name of Renee and Louise. Renee and Louise meet as young girls at a Carmelite monastery, where both of the girls have been sent by their families with the hope that both of them are going to perhaps choose a religious life and become nuns eventually. Louise has an aunt at the monastery who has chosen to sort of live out the rest of her life as a nun, and her family is sort of expecting that she will become a nun and not accept her dowry and accept the fortune that's been left to her by her grandmother, because her father has great hopes that he will be able to take the money that should belong to Louise and give it to her brother, because he has two sons, one who will inherit the family title and the family estates and the family fortune, and the other who, unless money can be found somewhere, is not going to be independent, is not going to be self-sufficient and able to live off his income without working. And so her father has taken Louise's money and invested it to the point where it's able to produce a big enough of an income to make her brother independent. Now, the novel begins when both of these young women, Renee and Louise, Renee, who is from the provinces, and Louise, who is from Paris, have decided to leave this monastery and go back to their families. And so, of course, Louise arrives in Paris in her family's house, a little bit to the dismay of her father, who has just had his plans for his son wrecked, and he endeavors to encourage Louise to marry someone who is going to accept her without her dowry, someone who will adhere to the French laws related to dowry, by sort of signing off and signifying that he's received the dowry, or received something in place of a dowry, without actually expecting the money. And so Louise, comes all innocent from this convent, in these very plain clothes, and within a matter of days, her mother has dressed her up and is training her in the ways of society. Now, Louise is a delightful character because she is a little bit romantically minded. And Balzac sets the whole scene for the romance that is her life, for the passion that is her life, by introducing us first to her family home, which is described in great detail because there are still many, many rooms within the family mansion that are in disrepair, that have been stripped of all their fine furnishings and all the fine architectural details of worth. And they were stripped in the French Revolution, and they've sat that way for years, and her father is not wanting to spend the money to restore those rooms, because of course he is sort of scraping by in a state of reduced wealth that has been the result of these politically tumultuous decades. And so Louise shows up to the house, and sort of sees things in disrepair just as they were in her childhood, and gets to stay in her grandmother's rooms, her grandmother who has left her this fortune and who has died several years ago. And she is learning things from her grandmother through her memories, and also learning things from her mother, who is trying to teach her the very, almost seemingly to Louise, the cold ways of society. And there are references throughout to Shakespeare plays. So for instance, Louise is very romantically minded, that she chooses a lover and she sort of pulls him along, and she wants complete devotion from him. She wants him to be a servant, and there is a reenactment of the Romeo and Juliet balcony scene in this novel, where her lover Philippe is in a tree outside her window, without her really realizing he's there at first. And when she realizes he's there, she gets her governess to come out with her into the garden grounds to meet with him and to speak with him. And there's these theatrical moments where she is signaling to him, with a flower arrangement, that she is in fact, interested in him. And she is actually signaling to him at the opera, at a production of Romeo and Juliet. And so certainly that faded romance is hinted at from the very beginning. And so on one hand, you have this very romantic Louise, and on the other hand, you have Renee, who is in this arranged marriage with a man, I would say, probably about 20 years older than her. I think he's described as being in his late 30s, and Renee is just out of the convent, so probably around the age of 18 or 19. I forget whether Balzac specifies, but so there is an age gap, and he is this very thin, sickly, sad-looking young man, because he went off to fight with Napoleon in the wars and was taken prisoner in Russia and spent some time in Siberia. And it was only after many, many years of everyone except his father, who held out hope, thinking he was dead, that this young man, Louis, finally did return from his exile to take up his position in his father's house, take up the fortune that his father has miserly saved for him, and to marry. And whereas Louise is looking for the great love, Renee is very accepting of her fate. She realizes that she has a choice. She can either go back to the convent and become a nun, or she can marry this man she barely knows. And so she chooses to marry Louis with this very philosophical and resigned expectation that love is something you build. Love is something you work at. Love is something that can be developed over time. And if for some reason she isn't able to develop the sort of love one would want to have for a lover, she sort of resigns herself to the idea that she is going to develop a love for her husband as the father of her children. And she's looking forward to having children, and those children becoming the center of her life. And so their letters go back and forth, because it is an epistolary novel. They write letters back and forth to each other in this very intimate and in-depth way. It's very personal, and you get sort of the fruits of their most intimate feelings, their thoughts. They scold each other back and forth. You see where they themselves are trying to convince themselves of something that perhaps isn't true yet, where they change their minds about things, where they offer each other advice. And I think of all Balzac's novels that I've read so far, I like this one the most, with the exception of Cousin Bet, I said, and that's mainly because of the plot and the characters. But I like this one the most because we do get a very intimate, personal look into these characters that he's created in a way that some of his other narration styles really don't allow us. And so in that sense, it seems almost a very modern novel in the way that we see these characters' emotions. And so we have Louise and Renee's letters, but we also have mixed in now and then letters from other people. So Philippe, who is the love interest of Louise, is writing to his brother, writing to various people. Philippe is Spanish, and because of tumultuous political events in Spain, he has had to flee that country, and he has given up his title as a duke, to his younger brother. And he has been in exile in Paris for a little while with really no funding, and so he has taken to tutoring. Now, Louise's father has been offered a diplomatic post in Spain, and when I say offered, it's actually he expected it. He was offered a cabinet position first. He was offered the position of a minister of state, but he turned that down because he would rather do, I guess, the more luxurious, the more, to him, exciting and beneficial and rewarding job, rewarding in the sense of, financial compensation and compensation through social arrangements, the more rewarding job of a foreign minister. And so Louise's father is going to be posted to Spain. He proposes to take Louise with him, and that's when she meets Philippe, and this, ill-fated love affair begins. And throughout, it's not clear whether sort of a certain side, a certain viewpoint is being advocated for, or whether we're simply being shown these things. And for the most part, Balzac isn't trying to make moral statements, but you do see in his novels where he is seeming to side with certain characters over the other, because it's certainly Renee who gets the better outcome in this story. And it's Renee's ideas that are sort of justified in the outcome she gets in her life and in some of the final statements that appear in this novel. So for instance, I took copious notes here because there's some great quotes, but for instance, in the final pages of the novel, Louise says, "My dear doctor in petticoats was right. Marriage cannot rest upon passion as its foundation, nor even upon love." And so it ends with this final sentiment from Louise that, Renee was right. Despite throughout the whole novel, Louise is chiding and criticizing Renee for not choosing romance, for not choosing the life of Paris. At the end, she sort of breaks down and admits that Renee made the better choices. Renee stuck to the better philosophy, and throughout, in their letters, they reference actual philosophers. They're well educated, and I'm just flipping through my notes here to try to remember the name of a particular person that Renee referred to. So they had this very interesting conversation in their letters about Rousseau and about a Catholic philosopher whose name I can't seem to retrieve in my notes right now. But this Catholic philosopher that Renee held up. Here we go. Louise was reading Louise Renee, which was a work by Bonald, an 18th century philosopher and social theorist who is heavily rooted in Catholicism. And this novel by Corinne is the story of a love affair that ends tragically. So there's some more foreshadowing for us very early in Letters of Two Brides. And Renee is talking about how she's read Bonald and has drawn inspiration from him, and through her reading and through these philosophical works, she's been able to sort of resign herself and become quite enthusiastic in some ways about the married life ahead of her with Louis and with the children she expects to have. Whereas Louise is certainly reading other philosophers and is comparing Renee to Rousseau's Julie in a very unflattering light. And so I guess in summary, I greatly enjoyed Letters of Two Brides, something I would definitely recommend. I didn't make note of it, make note. I did not make note of this at the beginning of this video, but as I've said before, I'm not sure who translated these Balzac editions that I'm reading, as they are cheaply produced from somewhere around 1900, and they don't have translators listed. We just have this lovely frontispiece of Balzac with his arms crossed, and the title page says that it's the first complete translation into English. There are many sets that claim to be the first complete translation into English, and we have illustrations from drawings on the wood by famous French artists. And so the illustrations in my set aren't even identified by illustrator. But I would highly recommend this novel if you're looking to get into some of Honoré de Balzac's lesser works. You know, the obvious ones to start with when you come to Balzac are Peregorio, which I actually don't appreciate that much, and Cousin Bette, and some people also go for Lost Illusions, which I can't speak to because I haven't read that one yet. But if you're looking to get into one of his lesser works, I think Letters of Two Brides is certainly an excellent place to start. So I'll be back in the near future with the next work in volume 2 of my set of Honoré de Balzac.